Listen closely, because you're about to witness one of the most shocking transformations in modern-day romance. A cold-hearted millionaire named Oliver Harrington, once the envy of high society, mercilessly abandoned his pregnant wife. Shattered and alone, that wife, Sasha, found herself broken, but unyielding. Over the years, while Oliver basked in his own arrogance, Sasha rose from the ashes, building her own empire from the ground up. The twist. She eventually surpassed the very man who left her destitute. Now he comes crawling back, begging for her forgiveness. But can a woman who's weathered heartbreak and betrayal ever truly forget? Prepare for scandal, secrets, and redemption. Oliver Harrington had it all: a mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Redwood Falls, an elite circle of influential friends, and a flamboyant, jaw-droppingly expensive personal style that turned heads wherever he went. He was the type of man who commanded every room he entered, exuding a confidence that most people mistook for genuine power. But beneath that sculpted exterior and the perfectly tailored suits lay a heart that had grown cold from years of complacency and unchecked privilege. Sasha Turner was the polar opposite. Raised by a single mother in a modest two-room apartment on Pinecrest Street, she knew how to make do with very little. Her mother, Carla Turner, worked 2 jobs at the local diner by day and cleaning offices by night just to keep food on the table. Seeing her mother's exhaustion and self-sacrifice instilled in Sasha an indomitable spirit, and that spirit was what made her stand out to Oliver when they first met. Their story seemed like a fairy tale. At the beginning, the shy but brave daughter of a hard-working woman captures the heart of a wealthy, charismatic man at a charity gala. Everyone marveled at the notion of Oliver Harrington, Redwood Falls' most sought-after bachelor, being smitten with an unknown woman who wore a borrowed dress to the event. After all, Sasha's presence that evening was purely accidental. She had accompanied her boss, Lucinda Miller, as an assistant to manage the gala's silent auction. But one shared dance under the shimmering chandeliers changed both of their lives. At first, Oliver's love seemed genuine. He devoted time to Sasha, showed her the world of fine dining and exclusive clubs, and whispered that he had finally found the one. Sincerity sparkled in his eyes each time he told Sasha how her warmth and compassion reminded him of what he'd been missing in his high society lifestyle. It wasn't long before the romance turned serious. Oliver got down on one knee with a sparkling diamond ring, and Sasha, blinded by love, instantly said yes. Redwood Falls exploded with gossip about the city's golden son marrying a woman of modest background. But for a brief moment, it seemed like love would conquer all. The honeymoon period was short-lived. The first seeds of discord sprouted when Oliver introduced Sasha to his parents, Harriet and Gregory Harrington. They were old, money, rigid, proud, and steeped in illusions of superiority. Harriet, in particular, fixed Sasha with a skeptical gaze over afternoon tea. The older woman's voice dripped with icy politeness as she inquired about Sasha's family background, likely hoping to unearth some scandal or unsuitability. At every turn, Harriet criticized Sasha's manners, her posture, her accent, even how she sipped her tea. Oliver noticed, but said nothing. That was the first crack in their seemingly perfect union. Soon after their wedding, Sasha discovered she was pregnant. She was both thrilled and nervous. Though Oliver had mentioned wanting children someday, the timing seemed less than perfect. He was absorbed in expanding his father's business, a prestigious real estate conglomerate known throughout the state, and was rarely home. She hoped that the news of the baby would make him slow down and shift priorities. But the night she revealed her pregnancy, his reaction was shockingly indifferent. Sasha remembered the scene vividly. Oliver seated at the edge of their marble bathtub, staring into space for a long moment, before saying, "Are you sure?" She had expected joy, maybe tears of happiness. Instead, a wave of uncertainty and reluctance washed over his face. That was the second crack in their marriage. The next few months were a blur. Sasha's pregnancy progressed, but Oliver's involvement was minimal. He was often away on business trips, which Sasha soon discovered were more about late-night parties and networking events at private clubs. Worse, the tension at home escalated when Harriet's criticism turned into outright hostility. She would drop by unannounced, find fault with everything from how Sasha arranged the nursery to her choice of obstetrician. And Oliver, perpetually absent or distracted, never stood up for his wife. The real wedge, however, came one morning when Sasha, desperate for Oliver's emotional support, confronted him in the lavish dining room that overlooked their immaculately landscaped garden. She demanded to know why he seemed so disconnected and cold, why he showed more excitement about his next business deal than the impending birth of their child. They argued for hours, voices echoing through the otherwise empty house. Oliver told her she was needy and overdramatic. In a moment of rage and frustration, he told her that maybe they had moved too quickly, that he hadn't been ready for fatherhood or even for marriage. His words stung. It was as though he regretted marrying her in the first place. Shortly after that explosive fight, Harriet Harrington stepped in. She convened an emergency family meeting, excluding Sasha altogether. 2 days later, Oliver came home with legal papers, an annulment request. Sasha's heart pounded in her chest. An annulment. They had been married for over a year with a baby on the way. The sight of Oliver's eyes detached, explaining how it was best for both of them, obliterated her last shred of hope for salvaging the marriage. She resisted, refused to sign, tried to remind him of the love they once shared. But he was unyielding, driven by an unspoken sense of duty to his parents' expectations. Sasha watched her world collapse. The father of her unborn child was casting her aside like an inconvenience. With tears streaming down her face, she left the mansion carrying a single suitcase of clothes and a broken heart. She found temporary shelter at her friend Mia Olsen's small apartment. Mia, who had known Sasha since high school, welcomed her in. With the help of a no-nonsense attorney named Terence White, Sasha fought the annulment. She secured a modest financial settlement, far less than one might expect from a millionaire's fortune, but enough to keep her afloat temporarily. Thus, she was cast away from the life she thought she would have reduced to a shattered dream and a baby growing in her womb. And Oliver. In his mind, cutting ties with Sasha was an act of liberation. He returned to the high life, unbothered by the scandal, consoled by the knowledge that his powerful parents would manage the fallout. What Oliver didn't realize, however, was that heartbreak can drive the wronged party toward remarkable strength. Sasha was down, but she was most certainly not out. And the choice he made, letting her go at her most vulnerable moment, would haunt him in ways he could never have imagined. For Sasha, the first few months after her separation from Oliver were excruciating. She had to grapple not only with her own emotional turmoil, but also with the glaring reality of needing to provide for her soon-to-be-born child. She swore she would not let her child grow up deprived the way she once had. No matter how hard life got, she'd ensure her child would never feel unwanted. Initially, she relied on the small settlement from Oliver to cover medical bills and basic living expenses, but that money dwindled faster than she anticipated. Mia Olsen, Sasha's loyal friend, was already doing everything she could to support them. But the cramped apartment was not a long-term solution. Sasha needed a stable income and a place of her own. That was when she decided to use her one genuine advantage, her fierce determination. Before the marriage, Sasha had worked as an administrative assistant for Lucinda Miller, who ran a philanthropic foundation dedicated to community development projects, building libraries, after-school programs, and shelters for homeless families. Since Lucinda genuinely liked Sasha's tenacity and compassion, she offered her a chance to return. As heavily pregnant as she was, Sasha agreed. Every morning, she waddled into the foundation's modest office and threw herself into the tasks organizing files, managing donors, and calling potential sponsors for upcoming charity events. As the months passed, her belly grew along with her drive. One evening, she stayed late to finish some critical paperwork. Lucinda, who was just as devoted to the foundation as Sasha, noticed her employee's unwavering commitment. On a whim, Lucinda invited Sasha to join her on a site visit for a new project, a community center in a rundown neighborhood that desperately needed recreational and educational facilities. That visit changed everything. When Sasha walked into the dilapidated building they aimed to restore, she was overwhelmed by the same sense of purpose that once brought her mother pride. She encountered children who reminded her of herself, youthful eyes filled with yearning for a better life. In that moment, Sasha realized that her heartbreak, her hardships, all might have led her here. She could harness her pain and turn it into something meaningful, not just for herself, but for others who had so little. Buoyed by this newfound sense of direction, Sasha began to excel at her job. She coordinated new fundraising events, with extraordinary finesse making phone calls and personal visits to potential donors. Soon she discovered a knack for persuading people to part with their money for a good cause, a skill she never knew she had. Lucinda noticed too. 3 weeks after giving birth to a beautiful baby boy, whom she named Noah Sasha, was offered a promotion to project coordinator. The pay was modest, but it was enough for Sasha to rent a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of Redwood Falls. The space was humble walls, still yellowed from previous tenants, but it was a place of her own. She hung photos of baby Noah on the walls, and spent her evenings painting over the dull surfaces, making the apartment feel alive, full of hope. Meanwhile, Oliver Harrington was busy acquiring another strip of land in Redwood Falls, expanding Harrington Real Estate's already vast portfolio. He spent his days finalizing deals, hobnobbing with politicians, and throwing lavish parties. The scandal of his failed marriage had died down quickly, honey, and influence can accomplish that. His mother, Harriet, seemed pleased that he had cleaned up the mess. From the outside, Oliver's life seemed untouched by the heartbreak he'd left behind. But looks can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, Oliver felt a nagging emptiness, a void he couldn't quite fill, no matter how many deals he closed or how many exclusive events he attended. Sometimes in fleeting moments, late at night, he caught himself wondering about Sasha, how she was managing, if she'd found someone new, and what their baby looked like. Then, out of guilt or maybe fear of acknowledging his wrongdoing, he would push those thoughts aside and drown them in more work or more parties. Sasha's break came when she was tasked with organizing a grand charity ball aimed at raising funds to build a chain of youth centers across the county. It was an ambitious goal, one that demanded the presence and checkbooks of the city's most influential personalities. Lucinda had chosen Sasha for her ability to connect with people's hearts, to tell compelling stories that would stir philanthropic impulses. Despite the challenges, waking up at odd hours to tend to baby Noah, living on minimal sleep, and juggling the responsibilities of single motherhood with a demanding job, Sasha thrived. She reached out to Redwood Falls' wealthiest families, including those outside her immediate network. Surprisingly, some agreed to meet with her just because they'd heard rumors. That's Oliver Harrington's ex-wife. Initially, people were curious, wanting a glimpse into the scandal, but Sasha never entertained gossip. She focused solely on the Foundation's mission. One day, she managed to secure a meeting with the Prestons, who owned Preston Logistics, a major shipping company. Marcus Preston was known for his generosity, but also for his skepticism when approached by charities. Sasha arrived at his opulent office with documents and a heartfelt pitch, expecting to be received politely, but dismissed. Instead, Marcus was intrigued by her story, not just the philanthropic one, but the personal aspect of how she had gone from being the wife of a millionaire to a single mother forging her own path. He, like many in Redwood Falls, knew about Oliver's betrayal, and something about Sasha's resolve resonated with him. By the end of the meeting, Marcus signed a substantial check. He also promised to convince several of his influential friends to attend the charity ball. Sasha's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude. That single donation would jump-start the Youth Center project. More importantly, it confirmed that her heartbreak could be transformed into a driving force for good. Over the following weeks, the ball took shape. Invitations were sent out, the venue was booked, and Sasha meticulously planned every detail, from the floral arrangements to the entertainment. Even the press was alerted, with many reporters clamoring for an interview with the courageous single mother who was spearheading such a grand initiative. The day of the event arrived, and Redwood Falls turned out in its finest gowns and tuxedos, heading to the city's oldest and most magnificent ballroom. Sasha made sure everything was in place, walking around the venue in a simple but elegant navy blue gown, a far cry from the borrowed dress she once wore to the gala where she first met Oliver. She held baby Noah's photo tucked in her purse, a reminder that everything she did was for him, for his future. As people mingled and champagne flowed, donors wrote checks that collectively exceeded expectations. Even Lucinda was stunned by the magnitude of the generosity. Halfway through the night, Sasha prepared to give her speech on stage. She looked out over the sea of glamorous attendees. Among them was Harriet Harrington, staring icily from a corner of the room, having shown up only to protect the Harrington family's reputation. Next to her, in a tailored suit, looking outwardly confident but visibly uneasy, stood Oliver. Sasha's heart thundered in her chest. She had expected Harriet, perhaps, but not Oliver. The mere sight of him threatened to stir a hurricane of memories and emotions. Yet she took a deep breath, reminding herself of what she had accomplished. She was no longer the same naive woman who once trembled at his disapproval. She was a mother, a project coordinator, and a force to be reckoned with. She stepped up to the mic and spoke passionately about Redwood Falls, its children, and the Foundation's vision. The crowd erupted in applause. In that moment, her voice echoing through the grand ballroom, Sasha realized she had crossed a threshold. She had transformed her pain into power, forging a new path that would not be defined by Oliver's abandonment. The question was, how would Oliver react now that he was confronted with a Sasha who was stronger, more radiant, and perhaps more influential than she had ever been, before Oliver Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the applause faded? He could feel Harriet's stern gaze drilling into the back of his head, as if urging him to maintain composure. But Oliver's own emotions were in turmoil. He hadn't seen Sasha since before Noah's birth. Time had turned her into a woman of quiet poise and confidence, and although she still had the same striking eyes he remembered so well, there was a new resilience in her posture, like steel beneath her soft exterior. He couldn't help but recall the way he'd tossed her aside, not even bothering to attend the birth of his own child. The more he stared at Sasha, illuminated by the stage lights, speaking passionately about the cause she championed, the more a gnawing sense of regret welled up within him. This was not the anxious, meek wife he remembered. She had grown blossomed, and here she was, commanding the attention of Redwood Falls' elite. After Sasha's speech concluded, the band resumed playing soft music, and the crowd dispersed to mingle again. Harriet quickly whispered something in Oliver's ear, likely instructions to maintain distance or not to cause a scene. But Oliver, compelled by a confusing mix of curiosity and shame, began weaving through the crowd. He needed to speak to Sasha. He found her alone for a fleeting moment by a tall window, draped in velvet curtains, scanning the room to ensure everything was running smoothly. For a second, Oliver faltered, unsure if he had any right to approach her. His heart hammered as he recalled the last time they'd stood face to face. She had been in tears, begging him to reconsider, and he'd barely shown her the courtesy of acknowledging her pain. But Oliver was nothing if not impulsive. He took a deep breath and tapped gently on Sasha's shoulder. She turned, her expression flashing with surprise, before settling into a calm reserve. Up close, Oliver could see the lines of stress and tiredness that come with new motherhood, but also the unmistakable glow of someone who had conquered adversity. Oliver, Sasha said, her voice neutral, neither welcoming nor overtly hostile. "I didn't realize you would be here." My mother insisted," he managed to reply, wringing his hands. He felt absurdly vulnerable, a sensation he wasn't used to. "You did a wonderful job with this event. It's incredible." She gave him a polite nod. "Thank you. It means a lot to the children who will benefit from these funds." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Dozens of unspoken words churned in Oliver's mind. Finally, he mustered the courage to ask about Noah. How is our son?" Sasha's eyes flickered with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "His name is Noah, and he's perfect. Thank you for asking." Oliver's breath caught in his throat. He had never even asked the baby's name before, never visited Sasha to see the newborn. She turned her attention back to the crowd, as if indicating that their conversation was over, but Oliver persisted, stepping closer. He lowered his voice to a whisper, not wanting to attract attention. "I know I missed a lot," Oliver said, voice trembling with guilt he hardly recognized in himself. "Sasha, I'd like to see him, if that's possible." She regarded him for a moment, eyes unwavering. Then she exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure that would be a good idea," she said, looking away. "You left us, Oliver. I've had to do everything on my own, doctor's visits, sleepless nights, feedings, fevers, you name it. And now you just show up, like you can waltz back into his life whenever you please." Her words cut through him, and he realized how hollow his request must have sounded. To Sasha, it must seem like too little too late. Before he could respond, a group of donors approached her, congratulating her on the successful event. Oliver used the moment to slip away, unsure if he'd just done more harm than good. Over the next week, Oliver couldn't get Sasha or Noah off his mind. He had never told anyone, certainly not his meddling mother, but deep down, he knew regret was slowly eating him alive. He tried to focus on the business deals piling on his desk, or the new development project that Harrington Real Estate was spearheading, but found himself drifting, rereading the same documents over and over. For the first time in his life, he questioned the path he'd been walking. He had followed every step Harriet and Gregory Harrington had laid out for him, complete with a trust fund, private schooling, an Ivy League education, and now an upper-level executive position in the family conglomerate. Yet with all that success, he felt unfulfilled. In contrast, Sasha's life brimmed with meaning. She had a purpose, helping others, raising a child, building a legacy that wasn't measured purely in financial terms. That realization stung in ways Oliver hadn't expected. Driven by an urge to make amends, he contacted Terence White, Sasha's lawyer. Oliver requested a formal visitation arrangement. Terence, ever the professional, informed Sasha, who declined at first. But after conferring with her closest friends and Lucinda Miller, who advised her to keep an open mind for Noah's sake, Sasha relented. They agreed to an initial meeting at a neutral location, Redwood Falls Community Park. It was to be short-supervised, and only after Terence provided a signed agreement limiting Oliver's involvement until he could prove his sincerity. On a crisp Saturday morning, Sasha arrived at the park with Noah. He was perched in a stroller, blinking curiously at the world around him. Sasha had dressed him in a tiny blue beanie, and seeing that small figure made Oliver's heart clench. The baby his son was so precious, so full of potential. Oliver felt a swell of emotion that nearly overwhelmed him. "Hi, Sasha," said softly, pushing the stroller up to Oliver. He nodded, at a loss for words. For a moment, he just gazed at Noah, taking in the baby's chubby cheeks and bright eyes. Hesitantly, Oliver reached out a finger, which Noah gripped instinctively. That simple gesture sent a surge of emotion through Oliver, and for the first time, tears pricked at his eyes. The meeting was awkward, with Terence hovering nearby, overseeing the interaction like a hawk. Oliver tried to make small talk, asking how Noah liked certain baby foods or whether he slept through the night. Sasha answered in monosyllables, not unkind, but certainly guarded. When their allotted time ended, Oliver felt a pang of sorrow. He realized how little he knew about fatherhood and how much he had missed. Noah was more than a theoretical child. He was a living, breathing person with needs, wants, and an entire future ahead of him. And Oliver had barely been there for any of it. Over the next few weeks, Oliver tried to be more consistent. With Terence and Harriet clashing behind the scenes, Harriet vehemently opposed these ridiculous concessions to Sasha. Oliver insisted on continuing the visits. He brought gifts for Noah, but Sasha insisted he focus on spending quality time rather than showering them with expensive presents. Slowly, Oliver began reading fatherhood books, asked Sasha for tips, and tried to show genuine concern for the day-to-day realities of raising a child. Yet Sasha kept him at arm's length. Her heart still hardened from the betrayal. The memory of being abandoned while pregnant wasn't something she could easily forgive. It would take more than sporadic visits and trinkets to rebuild any semblance of trust. In the background, an even bigger twist brewed. Sasha's impeccable performance at the foundation had caught the attention of international donors who were prepared to write enormous checks, enough to scale up multiple projects across the country. Lucinda hinted that Sasha could become the foundation's national liaison, traveling to different states, forging partnerships, and overseeing expansions. A role of that caliber came with influence, prestige, and a substantial salary eclipsing even Oliver's own net worth, if all went well. Sasha was on the brink of a major breakthrough that would not only secure her future and Noah's, but also catapult her into a league where she could look Oliver and the entire Harrington family squarely in the eye from a position of formidable strength. And Oliver. He sensed this shift. It wasn't that he resented Sasha's success. It was more that her rapidly rising trajectory made him reflect on his own life. For so long, he had equated wealth and social standing with power. But Sasha was garnering a different kind of respect, one anchored in compassion, dedication, and an unshakable moral core. The question that haunted him now was if Sasha soared even higher, would she even need him at all? And if he wanted a relationship with Noah, or maybe a second chance with Sasha, was he willing to fight for it, even if it meant going against the wishes of his controlling mother and the entire framework of his privileged upbringing? As days turned into weeks, Sasha's professional life skyrocketed. The Redwood Falls Community Foundation was no longer just a local name. It was making waves on the national philanthropic stage. Thanks to Sasha's relentless networking and the media attention from the successful charity ball, large-scale donors lined up to support the foundation's initiatives. One prominent contributor was Eleanor Thompson, a well-known philanthropist from Chicago who specialized in funding women's shelters and education programs. Meeting with Sasha, Eleanor was immediately impressed by her authenticity and unwavering commitment. It was not unusual for Sasha to be in the office until midnight, poring over proposals and strategizing fundraising campaigns. Each hour she spent away from Noah pained her, but she knew that building this foundation's reach was the key to both her personal fulfillment and her child's financial security. She had a growing sense of mission. This was not just about her or Oliver anymore. She was on the cusp of genuinely transforming lives on a grand scale. Oliver, meanwhile, found himself in a strange limbo. He continued to schedule visitation hours with Noah. Sometimes they met at the park. Other times, Sasha allowed him a brief visit to her apartment. He spent these precious moments learning how to feed Noah, change diapers, basic tasks he had never bothered to understand before. During one visit, he saw how small and cramped Sasha's apartment was. Despite its tidiness and the warmth that radiated from the cheerful decor, he felt a pang of guilt. She was the mother of his child, and she was living in conditions that were nowhere near the luxury he'd once taken for granted. Over time, Oliver's interactions with Sasha became less stilted. She still wore her guard, but occasionally a faint smile crossed her lips. If Noah did something particularly adorable, like giggle uncontrollably at a silly face, Oliver made Sasha would glance at Oliver with a look that hinted at shared parental pride. For Oliver, these subtle moments felt like progress, even if she hadn't explicitly forgiven him. His mother, Harriet, noticed the shift too, and she was furious. After catching wind that Oliver had been spending more time with Sasha and Noah, Harriet summoned him for a private lunch at the Harrington Mansion, a majestic estate with pristine gardens and marble fountains. Over a lavish spread of delicacies, Harriet wasted no time in voicing her dissatisfaction. "Oliver, this is absurd," she snapped, her knife clattering against her plate. "You're coddling that woman. She's using the child as leverage, and you're falling for it." Oliver clenched his jaw. Harriet had never even asked to see her grandchild. In fact, she had pretended as though Noah didn't exist. Her coldness toward the situation was something he used to admire, her stoic approach to problems, but now he found it repugnant. "This is my son we're talking about," Oliver retorted, trying to keep his voice calm. "And Sasha isn't using him as leverage. She's raising him on her own, doing a damn good job of it too." Harriet scoffed, swirling her wine glass. "Yes, well, I'm sure she's feeding him sob stories of how cruel we are." Oliver, you know how these people operate. She's out for revenge, mark my words. Oliver's stomach churned. If Sasha wanted revenge, she could have fought for a much larger settlement. She didn't. She's just living her life, building her career, and taking care of Noah. Harriet sniffed in disdain, but Oliver refused to be swayed. He stood up from the table, feeling an unfamiliar surge of anger toward his mother. Enough. I don't want to hear it. Leaving his half-eaten meal behind, Oliver stormed out. For once he didn't care about Harriet's wrath or the disapproval in Gregory Harrington's eyes. He only cared about doing right by his child. It was a small step in his journey of self-realization, but it felt monumental. As he sped away from the mansion in his sleek sports car, he thought about how unthinkable such an outburst would have been just a few months earlier. He had always been Harriet's perfect son, abiding by every whim. Now he finally recognized that his mother's controlling nature was as toxic as it was powerful. Later that week, Sasha received an invitation from a prestigious women's leadership conference in New York City. Eleanor Thompson had recommended her to be a guest speaker, highlighting her triumph over personal adversity and the positive impact she was making through the foundation. Nervous but excited, Sasha prepared her speech meticulously, weaving in anecdotes from her own struggles to emphasize the power of resilience and compassion. She left Noah under Mia's care for the 3-day conference, though it pained her to be away from him overnight. Still, she knew that forging these new connections could open doors to even larger donations, amplifying the foundation's reach exponentially. The conference was held at a grand hotel in downtown Manhattan. Sasha was awestruck by the sheer scale of it. Hundreds of attendees from across the globe, all accomplished women from various fields. Finance, technology, activism, philanthropy, and more. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped onto the dais, heart hammering. But as soon as she spotted familiar supportive faces, especially Eleanor Thompson's encouraging smile, her nerves settled. She began with her own story, carefully omitting certain details about Oliver and the Harringtons, to keep the focus on the universal lessons of fortitude and empathy. The audience was captivated. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. A line of women eager to speak with her formed, each one offering congratulations, curious about her foundation's work, or simply moved by her journey from heartbreak to empowerment. That night in her quiet hotel room, Sasha felt a wave of pride she had never known. She had come so far in such a short time. Memories of Oliver's betrayal still lingered, but they no longer defined her. She was carving out a life filled with meaning and love. Love for her child, for her community, and for the immense possibilities that lay ahead. Back in Redwood Falls, Oliver stood alone in his upscale apartment, reading an email update from Terrence White regarding the next scheduled visitation with Noah. Sasha was out of town, so their usual arrangement had to be postponed. Oliver felt a hollow ache in his chest, realizing how much he was beginning to value those few hours with his son. He placed his phone aside and paced the living room, unsettled by his own restlessness. He thought about calling Sasha, but a wave of hesitation stopped him. For one, she was at a conference, likely busy, and not interested in hearing from him. For another, what would he say? That he missed seeing Noah? That he was proud of her accomplishments? These words felt heavy on his tongue, weighed down by the shame of having once dismissed her. Instead, he decided to pay a surprise visit to the Redwood Falls Community Foundation office, hoping to talk to Lucinda Miller about how he could better support Sasha and Noah. Upon arriving, he found the office nearly empty, It was late and most people had gone home. A single light glowed from the corner office. He knocked softly, and Lucinda's voice told him to come in. Lucinda's brows rose in surprise when Oliver stepped through the door. She was an elegant woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a warm demeanor, but she had little patience for nonsense. She and Sasha had grown close over the years, like mentor and mentee, and Oliver knew Lucinda wouldn't mince words if she saw through any attempt at manipulation. "Oliver Harrington," she said, setting aside a stack of papers. "This is unexpected. How can I help you? I want to support the foundation." He began shifting uncomfortably in his designer loafers. "I know Sasha's done a tremendous job here, and I'd like to contribute financially or otherwise." Lucinda studied him for a long moment. "That's generous," she replied, "but we've never lacked funds from wealthy donors, especially since Sasha's success at the gala. So might I ask what your real motive is?" Oliver hesitated. He could sense her skepticism. Finally he spoke softly, admitting, "I want to show Sasha that I'm serious about being part of Noah's life, and maybe in some small way hers. I realize I made an unforgivable mistake, and I'm not sure how to rectify it." A flicker of sympathy crossed Lucinda's face, though she remained guarded. "That's for Sasha to decide. But if you want my advice, money alone won't fix this. If you truly care about them, you'll have to prove it over time." "Actions." "Oliver, consistent actions." Oliver nodded, humbled. He asked Lucinda to keep his conversation private, then left a sizable check for the foundation's next project. Though Lucinda thanked him, her parting words made it clear that trust would not be bought so easily. By the time Sasha returned from New York, the Redwood Falls Community Foundation was buzzing with the news of Oliver's visit. Lucinda handed her Oliver's check, but also relayed his words. Sasha studied the slip of paper, the amount written on it, so large it could easily cover an entire youth center project. She felt a surge of conflicting emotions, gratitude for the donation and skepticism about Oliver's motives. Later, as she cradled Noah in her arms, she pondered how life had taken such an unpredictable turn. It wasn't just Oliver. She was juggling potential partnerships with national corporations, fielding calls from new donors, enthralled by her New York speech, and receiving recognition from local politicians. All of it was exhilarating and exhausting. She reminded herself that she had built this new life brick by brick, without Oliver's help. The check was a useful resource, yes, but it wouldn't erase the nights she cried alone, pregnant and heartbroken. It wouldn't wipe away the memory of being served annulment papers or Harriet's scorn. No, Oliver had a long way to go if he ever hoped to redeem himself in her eyes, and by the looks of things, Sasha might soon have the kind of wealth and influence that made the Harrington name pale in comparison. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would test Oliver's sincerity, challenge Sasha's capacity for forgiveness, and perhaps rewrite the destiny of all involved in this tangled web of betrayal and ambition. The whirlwind of success around Sasha only gained momentum in the following months. On top of running local projects, she began traveling around the country, meeting with corporations, non-profits, and government agencies, forging alliances that funneled unprecedented resources into the Redwood Falls Community Foundation. Before she knew it, her official title shifted from Project Coordinator to Director of National Initiatives. The salary matched her responsibilities, and it was enough that she could finally purchase a home of her own. She chose a modest but charming suburban house in one of Redwood Falls' quieter neighborhoods. Surrounded by a white picket fence and a small garden, it had 3 bedrooms, one for her, one for Noah, and a spare that she turned into a makeshift office. Moving day was a cause for celebration. Mia Olson and a handful of fellow foundation staff came to help unpack boxes while Noah crawled around, delighted by the new space. Sasha's heart swelled. This was her achievement, built from the ashes of a broken marriage. This was home. Yet despite her thriving career, personal conflict continued to simmer. Oliver had managed to secure regular visitation rights, mostly on weekends. At first he picked Noah up for playdates, nervous and new at fatherhood, but slowly growing more confident. Sasha oversaw the interactions like a hawk, not out of vindictiveness, but out of caution. She refused to let her guard down entirely, not wanting to see her child hurt. But to Sasha's surprise, Oliver demonstrated consistency. He arrived on time, returned Noah well-fed and smiling, and even texted Sasha throughout the week, asking about the baby's doctor appointments or if he could help in any way. Slowly, an awkward but functional co-parenting rhythm emerged. Noah, too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, simply basked in the attention. Meanwhile, Harriet Harrington launched a quiet yet persistent campaign to stifle Sasha's growing influence in Redwood Falls. She gossiped at country clubs and high society gatherings, casting Sasha as a social climber, exploiting her philanthropic work for personal gain. She paid certain tabloids to run subtly negative stories, questioning the foundation's finances, even though the foundation underwent rigorous audits. Harriet even contacted city officials, attempting to dig up any morsel of scandal that could taint Sasha's image. But each effort fizzled. Sasha had built her operation on transparency, and her growing network of supporters dwarfed whatever petty rumors Harriet could concoct. Oliver, too, was outraged by his mother's schemes. For the first time in his life, he found himself openly defying Harriet, refusing to partake in her smear campaign. Their relationship grew strained to the point of near collapse. Harriet threatened to revoke certain privileges, but Oliver resolved to follow his own conscience, let her threats roll off his back. He finally recognized how destructive her manipulations were, how they had poisoned his own marriage and fatherhood from the start. With each month that passed, Sasha's star shone brighter. Eleanor Thompson introduced her to a circle of global philanthropists who opened even more doors. Soon Sasha was consulting on international projects, women's shelters in Africa, educational reform in Southeast Asia, expanding far beyond the confines of Redwood Falls. Though she loved the worldwide reach, her heart remained anchored in her hometown, ensuring that Redwood Falls continued to benefit from her influence. Inevitably, rumors began circulating that Sasha might surpass the entire Harrington clan in net worth if she capitalized on speaking engagements, consulting fees, and the spin-off ventures under her philanthropic umbrella. Officially, Sasha never claimed such wealth. She reinvested much of her money into new charitable programs, while still securing enough for herself and Noah to live comfortably. But the whispers persisted, especially among the social circles that once dismissed her. The big question in everyone's mind: would Oliver Harrington, once the city's golden child, try to worm his way back into Sasha's heart, now that she rivaled or even eclipsed his status, or was his newfound humility genuine? One chilly evening, Oliver appeared at Sasha's doorstep for a scheduled visit. He was there to pick up Noah for a weekend outing, something they'd planned so Sasha could attend a major fundraising gala in Chicago. However, Sasha's babysitter had fallen through, and she'd asked Oliver if he could watch Noah for a couple of extra hours. He agreed without hesitation. When Oliver stepped inside, his eyes roamed the cozy living room, where Noah's toys were neatly arranged on a plush rug. The space felt warm, inviting a sharp contrast to the mausoleum-like grandeur of the Harrington mansion. Sasha emerged from the kitchen, wearing a simple green sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Their eyes locked in a moment of mutual acknowledgement. This was far more intimate than the polished parties and hurried exchanges they'd grown used to. "You can sit," she said, motioning to the couch. "Noah's napping. I'll wake him in a bit." Oliver nodded and took a seat, pressing his palms against his knees. "Thanks," he said quietly. After a brief silence, he ventured, "This place, it's lovely. Feels like home." "It is," Sasha replied, offering a small smile. "For me and Noah, at least." Her implication was clear. It wasn't his home. Oliver nodded slowly, shoulders tense. "I know I forfeited any right to call this my home," he said. "But I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You've come a long way." She studied him for a moment, as though trying to assess his sincerity. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying a quieter intensity. "People keep asking if you're only spending time with Noah because I'm successful now, if you're trying to latch onto my coattails." "Are you?" Oliver looked down. "I understand why they'd say that," he admitted, "and I can't blame them. But no, that's not it. Honestly, I started doing this because I realized what I'd lost. Not just you, but my chance to be a father to Noah. I won't lie, I never really knew how to be a dad. My parents certainly didn't set the best example. But I'm trying, Sasha. I'm trying to be better." She folded her arms, nodding slowly. He noticed the hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "Noah deserves a father who's present, who cares," she said. "But you understand that I can't just forget what happened. You left me at my lowest. That's not something a person heals from overnight." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm not asking you to forget, or even to forgive me right away. I just want a chance to show that I'm different, that I've changed." Their conversation was interrupted by Noah's cry from the nursery. Sasha left to tend to him, returning a few moments later with a wide-eyed, babbling baby in her arms. Oliver reached out and Noah giggled, recognizing his father. A faint smile tugged at Sasha's lips as she watched the two interact. It was a bittersweet sight. She had yearned for Oliver's involvement during her pregnancy, and now here he was, only after she had navigated the hardest part of motherhood alone. As Oliver settled Noah into a car seat for their outing, Sasha felt torn. Part of her still hurt, still remembered the night he'd handed her those annulment papers, still felt the sting of Harriet's endless cruelty. But another part, the part that saw how Noah lit up around Oliver, wondered if redemption might be possible. When they left, Sasha found herself sitting alone in the stillness of her house, reflecting on how far she'd come. In another life, she might have dismissed Oliver's attempts outright, but the success she'd achieved, the financial security, and the emotional strength she'd cultivated gave her a confidence she once lacked. She had choices now. She didn't need Oliver or anyone else to define her. If she decided to let him into her life, it would be on her terms. As she rose to prepare for the gala in Chicago, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Eleanor Thompson, subject line, "Incredible opportunity." Sasha's eyes widened as she read. Eleanor wanted her to head an entirely new philanthropic venture, a global initiative on women's empowerment that would require extensive travel and an even bigger platform. The attached remuneration was staggering, enough to make her one of the most influential philanthropists of her generation. Sasha exhaled a swirl of anticipation and anxiety coursing through her. Accepting would mean an enormous step forward for her career, but it could also complicate her newly established co-parenting arrangement. She stared at Noah's photos on the mantel, then glanced at the clock. She had a flight to catch soon, but her mind was brimming with possibilities. One thing was clear: the next chapter of her life would bring monumental change, whether Oliver was ready for it or not. And if he wanted to prove himself worthy of her trust, of Noah's love, he would have to meet Sasha on her level, where strength, compassion, and ambition intertwined. No longer could she be seen as the vulnerable woman who needed saving. She was the architect of her own destiny, and anyone who wanted to walk beside her would need to earn that privilege. Months passed, and Sasha continued to rise in both prominence and power. She accepted Eleanor Thompson's offer, officially becoming the Director of Global Women's Initiatives for Thompson and Turner Philanthropies, a partnership that combined Eleanor's existing network with the Redwood Falls Community Foundation. Sasha now traveled to international summits, keynoted high-profile events, and oversaw projects that empowered women and children in dozens of countries. Occasionally, she brought Noah along, ensuring he wasn't deprived of a parent's presence. All the while, her co-parenting arrangement with Oliver evolved into a careful balancing act. She granted him more time with Noah, especially when her travels took her away for extended periods. Oliver rose to the occasion. He learned how to soothe Noah when he had a fever, how to whip up baby-friendly meals, and how to manage a meltdown in the grocery store aisle. He took parenting classes quietly and without fanfare, wanting to prove to Sasha that he was in this for the long haul. Though Harriet continued her smear campaigns, they fell increasingly flat. Redwood Falls knew Sasha's track record. More than that, the national and international press recognized her as a beacon of philanthropic leadership. Harriet's petty gossip couldn't compete with factual evidence of Sasha's impact. Even prominent figures in Harriet's social circle turned a blind eye to her rants, eager to stay on Sasha's good side. The real turning point came one evening when Sasha hosted a lavish charity dinner in Redwood Falls, the proceeds of which would go toward building a chain of women's resource centers across the country. The city's elite philanthropic heavyweights and even some international dignitaries attended. It was the largest philanthropic event Redwood Falls had ever seen, outclassing even the Harringtons' annual fundraisers. Midway through the event, Harriet showed up unannounced, wearing a designer gown and exuding chilly arrogance. She cornered Sasha in a hallway near the catering tables, her tone dripping with condescension. "I see you've managed to gather quite a crowd," Harriet said, glancing around at the elegantly decorated venue. "But you mustn't forget where you came from. You might fancy yourself above my family now, but you'll always be that broke girl who stole my son's heart and then milked his name for sympathy." Sasha stood her ground, crossing her arms. Anger flared, but she summoned calm. "Mrs. Harrington, I didn't steal anything," she said, coolly. "In fact, your son left me, remember? As for milking his name, I believe I've done quite fine on my own merits." Harriet bristled, her knuckles whitening. "You're a fool if you think Oliver's sincerity is real. He's only hovering around you because you've become a sensation. He wants what you have. Mark my words." Sasha's eyes hardened. "I don't need your warnings. I know exactly who Oliver Harrington is, both the good and the bad. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an event to run." She walked away, leaving Harriet fuming. Despite the tension, the evening was a smashing success. Donations poured in, cementing Sasha's leadership in philanthropic circles. She gave a heartfelt closing speech, thanking her team donors and all the supporters who believed in her mission. Oliver, standing at the back of the crowd, watched with pride and a pang of regret. If only he had supported her sooner. How different might their path have been. After the dinner concluded and the guests began to leave, Oliver approached Sasha, who was standing alone near the stage, gathering her papers and thanking a caterer. "You look exhausted," he said gently. She shrugged. "A bit, but it was worth it." He hesitated, then asked, "Can we talk for a moment?" "In private." Sasha studied his face. Something in his expression suggested he had been wrestling with a decision. She led him to a small backstage room, dimly lit and quiet. Once inside, Oliver took a breath, running a hand through his hair. "I need to say something." He began, his voice low and strained with emotion. "Sasha, I've been trying to make amends to show you that I'm not the same man who walked out on you. But I realize I've never properly apologized, not just for leaving you, but for not believing in you when you needed me the most." Sasha stared at him, her pulse pounding. She had waited years through heartbreak, loneliness, and finally triumph for these words. "I'm sorry for abandoning you, Oliver," continued, eyes glistening. "I was a coward. I let my mother dictate my life, and I hid from my responsibilities. I've missed so much of Noah's life, and I can never get that time back. I don't expect you to forgive me instantly, or maybe ever. But I want you to know that I'm done living under anyone else's thumb. I want to be the father Noah deserves, and if there's any place for me in your future, even just as your friend, I'd do anything to earn that." Sasha's throat tightened. The Sasha of old might have dissolved into tears, overwhelmed by longing and heartbreak, but the Sasha standing here in the glow of her accomplishments was different. She was strong enough to weigh his words carefully, to recognize both the sincerity and the residual doubts coiled in her heart. "I appreciate your apology," she said, softly, tears brimming in her own eyes. "And I do see the changes you've made, Oliver. But trust is built day by day over time. Noah deserves a loving father, and I won't keep him from you. As for me—" She paused, her voice trembling. "I can't forget how much you hurt me, but I also can't ignore the effort you've put in. So we'll take this one step at a time." He nodded, relief and uncertainty mingling on his face. The air crackled with unfinished tension. They stood silently for a moment, letting the gravity of the conversation settle. Then, with a gentle nod, Sasha turned to leave, flicking off the backstage light. Over the ensuing weeks, Oliver continued to show up for Noah, no longer needing Sasha's supervision. He invited Noah to the Harrington mansion, but Harriet remained aloof. In fact, Harriet spent most of her time traveling abroad, choosing to distance herself from Oliver's betrayal. Freed from her scrutiny, Oliver discovered fatherhood was not just an obligation, but a joy. He found himself cherishing bedtime stories, playground visits, and sloppy infant kisses more than any business deal he had ever closed. Gradually, Sasha allowed Oliver deeper glimpses into her life, sharing pictures from her international trips, inviting him to Noah's pediatric checkups, and even discussing upcoming philanthropic projects. Their interactions lost some of the earlier frostiness, replaced by a tentative warmth. They weren't lovers. They were somewhere between co-parents and friends, edging toward something more complex and profound. One evening, Oliver accompanied Sasha to an event in Chicago, where she was set to deliver a major keynote on global women's empowerment. He looked after Noah while she took the stage. After the speech, they met for a late dinner in the hotel restaurant. Over a simple pasta dish, they talked about everything from personal regrets to future ambitions. Oliver admitted he was considering leaving Harrington Real Estate, to start a venture of his own, something aligned with social impact rather than just profit. Sasha encouraged him, offering her network of contacts and insights. For the first time in their relationship, they connected on a level that extended beyond romance or obligation. They were two individuals evolving, forging new paths, and so the twisted threads of their story began to unravel into a tapestry of second chances and cautious hope. Sasha had proven she could stand on her own, carrying both her child and her dreams toward horizons that not even Redwood Falls' harshest critics could tarnish. Oliver, once a heartless millionaire who abandoned his pregnant wife, slowly shed his old skin, emerging as a humbled man, determined to learn from his failures. They weren't perfect, nor did they pretend to be. But in the bittersweet dance of mistakes and redemption, they found a common rhythm. And perhaps in time that rhythm would lead them to a new form of love, one built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a deep understanding of the fragility of the human heart. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately redemption. We witnessed the fall of a heartless millionaire, Oliver Harrington, who abandoned his pregnant wife Sasha at her most vulnerable hour, only to realize too late the magnitude of what he'd lost. We watched Sasha transform her pain into power, building a philanthropic empire that not only rivaled the Harrington name, but transcended it. In the end, both Oliver and Sasha reclaimed their dignity, discovering new ways to mend old wounds and become the parents and people they were always meant to be. If this story gripped your heart and took you through every twist and turn, then do us a favor, hit that like button, share this video with friends who love a good drama, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life-inspired stories. Your support helps us bring you tales of resilience, betrayal, and unforgettable redemption. Don't miss out.